Mason Sisk. A 14-year-old boy called 911 and told the dispatcher he'd been playing video games in the basement when he heard gunshots upstairs. He said he ran outside and saw a vehicle pulling away from the house. Police rushed to the home in Elkmont, Alabama on the night of September 2nd, 2019, expecting to find a break-in or a home invasion. What they found instead was 5 members of the same family shot in the head while they lay in their beds. And the only survivor was the boy on the phone. His name was Mason Sisk, and he was lying about everything. The victims were his father, John Wayne Sisk, 38 years old, his stepmother, Mary Sisk, 35, and 3 younger siblings, 6-year-old Kane, 4-year-old Aurora, and Colson, who was 6 months old, an infant, still in his crib. Every single one of them had been shot in the head. The execution-style precision of it stunned investigators, especially once they started looking at the crime scene more carefully. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication that a stranger had been in the house. The weapon used was a handgun, and it didn't belong to the Sisk family. Mason had taken it from a family friend's home before that night. When detectives sat Mason down for a formal interview, his story started falling apart almost immediately. The details didn't line up. The timeline didn't work. And eventually, the 14-year-old confessed. He told investigators he had killed all 5 of them. When they asked him why, his answer was chilling in its simplicity. He said he was fed up with his family. He said the kids were going through a lot. That was it. That was his justification for executing 5 people, including a baby. But the murders weren't even the first time Mason had tried to hurt someone in that house. Prosecutors later revealed that before the shootings, Mason had attempted to poison his stepmother by putting peanut butter in her coffee. Mary Sisk had a severe peanut allergy. The poisoning attempt failed, but it told investigators something important about Mason. This wasn't a sudden explosion of rage. He had been thinking about killing for a while. His history painted a darker picture than anyone in the community had realized. He had anger control issues. He had threatened his entire family before. Teachers and school staff had seen flashes of something volatile underneath his quiet exterior, but nobody connected the dots until it was far too late. Mason Sisk's first trial in September of 2022 ended in a mistrial after new evidence surfaced from his stepmother's phone. But in April of 2023, he stood trial again. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict. 2 hours to decide the fate of a boy who had wiped out nearly his entire family in a single night. In September of 2023, Judge Chadwick Wise sentenced Mason Sisk to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's written opinion didn't hold back. He called the crime ghastly, disturbing, and draped in unmitigated evil. He wrote that the circumstances of the Sisk case were much more appalling than other cases where life sentences have been upheld for juvenile defendants. Mason appealed. In December of 2023, the appeal was denied. The Alabama Appeals Court upheld his conviction again in 2024. Every legal door has been shut. Every argument has been rejected. And somewhere in an Alabama state prison, a teenager who shot a 6-month-old baby in the head while he slept in his crib will spend every remaining day of his life behind concrete walls. He was 14 when he pulled the trigger. He'll be an old man if he makes it that long, when he finally dies inside. 5 people in their beds, 5 members of his own family, and the only reason anyone ever found out what really happened is because a 14-year-old wasn't as good a liar as he thought he was. Mason Sisk killed the people closest to him, but at least his family didn't see it coming. In Iowa, a 17-year-old boy gave everyone around him every possible warning sign for months, and the 2 people who refused to give up on him paid for it with their lives. Isaiah Sweet. Police had been called to the Sweet household 18 times in the months leading up to the murders. 18 times. Kicking his grandfather, threatening both grandparents, trying to start fires with aerosol cans and a lighter, bringing a knife to school on roughly 10 separate occasions. And every single time Isaiah Sweet was sent back home to the same house, to the same people he kept threatening to hurt. Until the weekend, he finally did. On the morning of May 13, 2012, a friend of Isaiah's walked into the Sweet family home in Manchester, Iowa. He'd been told by Isaiah to come over and take whatever he wanted. When the friend stepped inside, he found Richard and Janet Sweet, Isaiah's grandparents and legal guardians, both shot to death with an assault rifle. He turned around and left immediately. Isaiah Sweet was 17 years old, and the two people who had raised him, the two people who kept answering the door every time police brought him back, were dead on the floor of their own home. The killings had happened on May 11th, the Friday of Mother's Day weekend. Isaiah had been house-sitting while his grandparents were supposed to be away. But they came back early, and whatever happened inside that house ended with both of them murdered. After the shooting, Isaiah loaded stolen items into his grandparents' vehicle: a television, a shotgun, the AR-15 he'd used to kill them. He drove to a friend's house and acted like nothing was wrong. It wasn't until that friend discovered the bodies that the truth started to come out. When police tracked Isaiah down, his behavior during the apprehension revealed just how far gone he was. He told investigators he had considered ramming his grandparents' vehicle into a police car. He said he wanted officers to shoot him because he couldn't bring himself to do it himself. This was a 17-year-old who had just executed two elderly people, stolen their belongings, and was now talking about suicide by cop with the casual detachment of someone ordering lunch. Isaiah's explanation for the murders was equally disturbing in its bluntness. He said his grandfather was verbally abusive. He said the man had made his life a living hell. Whether that was true or exaggerated, nobody will ever know for certain, because the only people who could confirm or deny it were lying dead on the kitchen floor. The background investigators pieced together painted a picture of a teenager who had been escalating for a long time. He'd been permanently excluded from school. He'd been diagnosed with mental health issues. Police calls to the house covered everything from drug use to arson attempts to threats against family members, police officers, and the general public. In 2021, years after his conviction, he was also diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. But none of those diagnoses changed what happened on that Friday night in May. Isaiah initially pleaded not guilty. Then, during his trial in October of 2013, he changed his plea to guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. In March of 2014, he was sentenced to life without parole. Then the law changed. In 2016, the Iowa Supreme Court ruled that life without parole for juveniles was unconstitutional. Isaiah Sweet was resentenced to life with the possibility of parole. His first parole review came in 2019. The board acknowledged he had made a fairly good start by earning certificates and completing programs behind bars, but they denied him anyway. They said more time would definitely be needed before they could consider releasing him. Isaiah Sweet remains incarcerated at the Iowa State Penitentiary in Fort Madison. He sits in a cell paid for by the same state that sent police to his grandparents' door 18 times and never once removed him from the home. The system knocked on that door again and again, and every time it walked away and left Richard and Janet Sweet alone with the person who would eventually kill them. Isaiah Sweet destroyed the 2 people who kept trying to save him. But what happens when the victim isn't a family member or a guardian? What happens when a 15-year-old walks a 10-year-old girl out of her own front door, kills her, and then tells investigators a rainstorm was to blame? Aidan Zellmer, On the evening of June 7, 2017, a 15-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl left a home in Thornton, Colorado together. He told the family they were walking to a store. Only one of them came back. When Aiden Zellmer returned alone, he had an explanation ready. He said they'd been separated in a rainstorm. He said he couldn't find her. He said she just vanished. An Amber Alert was issued for 10-year-old Kiaya Campbell, the daughter of Zellmer's mother's boyfriend. Search teams fanned out across the neighborhood, desperate to find a little girl lost in a storm. There was just one problem. Neighbors confirmed there was no rainstorm that night. Kiaya's body was found the next day, June 8th, in a drainage ditch behind a row of homes near 128th Avenue and Jasmine Street. She had skull fractures, a broken finger. She had been struck approximately 30 times with a metal pipe. The savagery of it was almost incomprehensible. This was a 10-year-old girl who weighed barely enough to cast a shadow, and the person who killed her had beaten her with a metal object until her skull caved in. Aiden Zellmer was 15 years old. He had been living in the same household as Kiaya. He was the last person seen with her alive, and his alibi about a rainstorm had already collapsed before investigators even sat down with him. The evidence was damning. Blood and DNA found on Zellmer's shoes were tied directly to Kiaya. He initially stuck to his story about getting separated, but eventually, he told others that he had used a metal object to beat her. The murder weapon, a metal pipe, was never recovered, but the forensic evidence didn't need it. The DNA told the whole story. Zellmer was arrested on June 9th, 2 days after Kiaya's body was found. He was initially charged as a juvenile, but in January of 2018, the case was transferred to adult court. He became one of the youngest individuals in recent Colorado history to be prosecuted for homicide in the adult system. Originally, Zellmer also faced sexual assault charges. Those were eventually dropped as part of a plea deal. On February 1, 2019, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. The plea eliminated the need for a trial, but it didn't spare the courtroom from hearing what he had done. Prosecutor Dave Young addressed the court directly. He said, "15-year-olds make bad decisions, but they don't commit cruel, heinous crimes like this." He described how Zellmer had struck Kiaya at least 5 times in the head with the pipe, left her body in a field, and then walked back to police and calmly misled them while search teams were out looking for her. He was calm, cool, and collected during his interactions with investigators, even as a dead child lay in a ditch less than a mile from where he was standing. On March 11, 2019, Aiden Zellmer was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. With good behavior, he could potentially see a parole hearing after 30 years. But that still means the earliest he could walk free would be sometime around 2049, when he'd be in his late 40s. The defense cited mental health issues, a troubled family history, and alleged abuse. But those arguments couldn't erase the forensic evidence, the lies to investigators, or the sheer brutality of what was done to a child who trusted the teenager walking beside her. Kiaya Campbell was 10 years old. She left her house that evening, expecting to walk to a store and come back. Instead, she was beaten to death and left in a drainage ditch by someone who lived under the same roof, someone who was supposed to be the older kid looking out for her. Her skull was fractured, her finger was broken, and the boy who walked her out that door came home alone, looked her family in the face, and invented a storm to explain why she wasn't with him. The community in Thornton was shattered. Vigils were held. A memorial grew along the fence near the drainage ditch where Kiaya's body was found. But underneath the grief was a question nobody could answer. How does a 15-year-old boy do something like this to a 10-year-old girl and then calmly mislead the people searching for her? What is missing inside someone who can do that? Aidan Zellmer killed a child who trusted him, and then stood in front of police with a straight face and lied about a storm that never happened. But across the Atlantic, in a Catholic school in Leeds, England, a 15-year-old didn't bother hiding his intentions at all. He told his classmates exactly what he was going to do. He showed them the weapons, and not a single person said a word to stop him. William Cornick. On the morning of April 28, 2014, a 15-year-old student at Corpus Christi Catholic College in Leeds, England, walked into his Spanish class carrying a 21-centimeter knife and a bottle of whiskey. The knife was for his teacher. The whiskey was to celebrate afterward. What happened that afternoon became the first case in British history of a student killing a teacher inside a classroom. The victim was Anne Maguire, a 61-year-old Spanish teacher who had spent 40 years at the school. 4 decades of lesson plans, parent-teacher conferences, school plays, and graduations. She was a fixture at Corpus Christi. Students and colleagues described her as dedicated, warm, and deeply committed to her work. She had given her entire professional life to that school. William Cornick had a different perspective. He harbored what investigators later described as a deep-seated grudge against Maguire, and he'd been telling people about it for months. Back at Christmas of 2013, roughly 4 months before the attack, Cornick had sent a Facebook message in which he talked about brutally murdering Anne Maguire. He didn't stop there. He posted another message offering £10 to anyone who would kill her for him. His classmates saw these posts. They read them, and not a single person reported them to a teacher or an administrator. On the morning of the attack, Cornick told other students what he was about to do. He showed them the knives he was carrying. They saw the weapons, they heard the plan, and still nobody alerted an adult. Halfway through the Spanish lesson, Cornick stood up, walked behind Anne Maguire, and stabbed her 7 times in the back and neck. One of the cuts went straight through her jugular vein. She staggered out of the classroom and into the corridor, where the head of languages intervened and tried to help. But the damage was catastrophic. Anne Maguire died from her injuries. Cornick walked back into the classroom. He sat down. He turned to a friend and said it was a shame he hadn't killed her. Then he referenced the bottle of whiskey he'd brought along to celebrate. When police arrived, Cornick showed no emotion. During interviews and court proceedings, he told officials he knew the family would be pissed off, but thought everything was fine and dandy. He later admitted that he had planned to kill 2 other teachers that day as well. The question that haunted investigators was how a student at a Catholic school in Leeds had slipped through every net designed to catch someone like him. On paper, Cornick looked almost unremarkable. He had near-perfect attendance, only 5 recorded behavioral incidents over 4.5 years. He was academically gifted. Teachers described him as polite. But something had changed. After collapsing on holiday and being diagnosed with diabetes, Cornick's personality shifted. In 2013, he learned that his diabetes diagnosis meant he could never join the army, something he'd apparently set his sights on. From that point forward, something inside him darkened. On November 3, 2014, William Cornick pleaded guilty to murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. In an unusual move, the judge lifted the anonymity order that normally protects minors in the British justice system, saying that naming Cornick publicly had a clear deterrent effect. The judge noted that Cornick displayed a total and chilling lack of remorse. Psychiatrists who evaluated him went even further. They said he possessed a gross lack of empathy for his victim and a degree of callousness rarely seen in clinical practice. His appeal against the sentence was denied in January of 2015. A 2019 inquest found that opportunities to prevent the murder had been missed. Students knew about Cornick's threats. They'd seen his Facebook posts. They'd watched him bring knives to school the morning of the attack, and nobody said a word. Anne Maguire spent 40 years teaching in that building. She walked into her classroom that morning the same way she had thousands of times before. She never walked out. William Cornick at least telegraphed his hatred. He hated Anne Maguire and made no real secret of it. But in Miami, Florida, a 14-year-old honor student did something arguably worse. He befriended his victim. He sat next to him in class. He laughed with him. And then, on an ordinary school day, he lured that friend into a bathroom stall and made sure he never came out. Michael Hernandez. He kept a journal. In it, he wrote about Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. He studied how they selected victims, how they avoided detection, how they controlled the people around them. He wrote about wanting to experience what it felt like to take a human life. He called it a mission to cleanse the planet, and he made a list of people he wanted to kill, including his own sister. Michael Hernandez was 14 years old, an honor student at Southwood Middle School in Palmetto Bay, Florida. And on a day in February of 2004, he decided to stop writing about murder and start doing it. His target was Jaime Goff, also 14, a straight-A student who played violin. Jaime was Michael's classmate and friend. They sat near each other, they talked between classes. Jaime had absolutely no reason to suspect that the boy next to him had been fantasizing about killing him for weeks. Hernandez had originally planned to kill 2 classmates that day. The first target was a student named Andre Martin, but Martin got suspicious and didn't take the bait. So Hernandez moved on to Jaime. He asked Jaime to come to the bathroom with him during class. Jaime said yes, because why wouldn't he? This was his friend. They walked down the hall together, 2 8th graders stepping out of class for a minute the way kids do in every school across the country. Once inside the bathroom stall, Hernandez pulled out a folding knife he'd concealed in his waistband that morning. He stabbed Jaime more than 40 times. He slit his throat. The violence was so extreme that investigators struggled to reconcile it with the fact that the attacker was a 14-year-old middle schooler who had walked into the building that morning carrying a backpack like everyone else. Jaime Goff fought for his life. There were defensive wounds on his hands and arms. He tried to stop the blade, but Hernandez had complete surprise and a weapon, and the confines of a bathroom stall left Jaime with nowhere to go. The wound to his throat severed major blood vessels. By the time anyone found him, he had bled to death on the bathroom floor. He was 14 years old. After the attack, Michael Hernandez stashed the knife in a hidden compartment of his backpack, walked out of the bathroom, and went back to class. He sat down at his desk. When a teacher noticed blood on his clothes and asked about it, he said he'd had a nosebleed. Nobody questioned it. It wasn't until another student walked into the restroom and found Jaime's body that the school went into lockdown and the investigation began. The teacher who noticed the blood alerted police. When investigators searched Hernandez's belongings, the journal told them everything: his obsession with serial killers, his desire to experience murder firsthand, his hit list, the planning, all of it in his own handwriting. The defense argued severe mental illness. Psychological evaluations revealed traits consistent with antisocial personality disorder and possible psychopathy. Hernandez's legal team pushed an insanity plea. The jury rejected it. In 2008, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Then came the legal shift. Following the 2012 Supreme Court ruling in Miller v. Alabama, which banned automatic life sentences for juveniles, Hernandez received a resentencing hearing in 2016. Prosecutors played recordings of phone calls Hernandez had made from jail in which he joked about his inability to cry. The calls revealed that years behind bars had done nothing to soften him. He remained obsessed with violent imagery and music glorifying death. The judge determined he should stay in prison for life. Michael Hernandez never publicly expressed remorse. Fellow inmates reportedly avoided him. He remained largely isolated and uncommunicative for the duration of his incarceration. On April 29, 2021, Michael Hernandez collapsed at Columbia Correctional Institution near Jacksonville. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The cause was cardiac dysrhythmia attributed to morbid obesity. He was 31 years old. He had spent more than half his life behind bars and never once walked free after that day in the bathroom. Jaime Goff's family was told about the death. They said the news was unexpected, but that it didn't bring them peace. Nothing could. Their son wasn't killed by a stranger. He was murdered by the boy he called his best friend in the bathroom of his own school on a day that was supposed to be like any other. And the thing that haunts them most isn't the violence itself. It's the fact that Jaime walked into that bathroom willingly because he trusted the person who asked him to come. If you're liking this video and you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. We drop new cases every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Axel Rudakubana. 26 children were dancing in a room. It was a Taylor Swift-themed workshop at the Heart Space Studio in Southport, England, on July 29, 2024. The kids were between 6 and 11 years old. They were singing, they were laughing. And then a 17-year-old walked through the front door, carrying a 20-centimeter kitchen knife he'd purchased online 16 days earlier. What happened in the next few minutes killed 3 children and injured 10 others. It became the deadliest attack on children in Britain in decades, and when police finally got the attacker into custody, what they found in his bedroom was somehow even more terrifying than what he'd done in that room. The victims were Babi King, 6 years old, Elsie Stancombe, 7 years old, and Alice da Silva Aguiar, 9 years old. 8 other children and 2 adults were wounded. Some of the kids in that room had to watch their friends die while trying to escape through a door that kept getting blocked. CCTV footage captured a child trying to leave the building during the attack, only to be pulled back inside by Rudakubana. He showed no emotion throughout. When officers eventually subdued him and placed him under arrest, he said something that investigators would never forget. He said, "It's a good thing those children are dead." Axel Rudakubana was born on August 7, 2006, in Cardiff, Wales, to Rwandan parents who were evangelical Christians. His family moved to Banks, a village near Southport, in 2013. Neighbors described him as quiet. He'd been involved in acting and drama as a child, even appearing in a BBC Children in Need video in 2018, playing the 10th Doctor. From the outside, nothing about his childhood screamed danger, but officials had been watching him since 2019, when he was just 13. He was referred to the Prevent Counterterrorism Program 3 separate times. The first referral came in December of 2019, after he was caught researching school shootings online. The second came in February of 2021 for uploading images of Muammar Gaddafi to Instagram. The third came in April of 2021 after he left browser tabs open researching the London Bridge terror attacks. 3 referrals, 3 chances for someone to intervene, and all 3 times the system decided he wasn't a sufficient threat and moved on. The warning signs didn't stop there. In October of 2019, he was excluded from school for bringing a knife. At age 13, he pulled a knife during a lesson and pointed it at his own chest. He had to be physically disarmed. He had a documented history of threatening other children with blades, and in December of 2024, just 7 months before the attack, police visited his home after his own mother found photographs of him posing with weapons. None of it was enough to stop what happened at the Heart Space. On the morning of the attack, Ruta Cubana booked a taxi under the false name Simon. He arrived at the studio around 11:45 in the morning, exited the car calmly, and walked inside. The attack lasted only minutes, but those minutes destroyed families and traumatized an entire town. When investigators searched his home, they found something that escalated the case from horrifying to nightmarish. Ruta Cubana had produced ricin, a biological toxin, enough for what experts estimated could be approximately 1,269 lethal doses. He also possessed a PDF copy of an Al-Qaeda training manual. The teenager who had just murdered 3 children in a dance class had been manufacturing poison in his bedroom. On January 20th, 2025, Ruta Cubana pleaded guilty to all 16 charges: 3 counts of murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, production of a biological toxin, possession of a terrorist document. He was removed from the courtroom during sentencing for disruptive behavior. 3 days later, on January 23rd, the judge handed down the sentence. Life imprisonment with a minimum of 52 years. The judge stated that if Ruta Cubana had been 18 at the time of the attack, he would have received a whole life term, meaning he would never have been eligible for release under any circumstances. As it stands, the judge said it was highly likely that he will never be released. The Home Secretary announced a public inquiry into how Ruta Cubana came to be so dangerous, despite being flagged to counterterrorism authorities 3 separate times. That inquiry is still ongoing, and 3 families in Southport are still burying the answer to a question the government should have asked years ago. Ruta Cubana acted alone with a knife and a plan. But in Pocatello, Idaho, 2 16-year-olds made a pact to become serial killers together. They filmed themselves planning it. They filmed themselves celebrating afterward. And the footage they left behind is some of the most disturbing evidence ever presented in an American courtroom. Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk. Before they killed her, they recorded a video. 2 16-year-old boys sitting in a car, looking directly into the camera, calmly explaining that they were about to murder someone. They talked about wanting to become serial killers. They talked about wanting to outdo the Columbine shooters. They talked about making history. And then they drove to their friend's house and did exactly what they said they were going to do. Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk, both 16, murdered their classmate and friend Cassie Jo Stoddart on September 22, 2006, in Pocatello, Idaho. She was 16 years old. She was house-sitting for relatives, and the 2 boys she considered friends stabbed her approximately 30 times. The planning had been going on for weeks. Draper and Adamczyk had started a death list of potential victims. They purchased 4 knives from a pawn shop called Mad Mike's on August 31st, using a friend named Joe Lucero, who was 18, to make the buy. They had attempted to kill on 8 or 9 previous occasions, according to their own recorded statements. But each time, their intended victims weren't home alone. Cassie Jo Stoddart was home alone. On the night of the murder, Draper and Adamczyk came over to hang out with Cassie and her boyfriend, Matt Beckham. They acted normal. They sat on the couch, they talked. And while nobody was watching, one of them slipped downstairs and unlocked the basement door. Then they told Cassie and Matt they were leaving to go see a movie. They didn't go to any movie. They drove to a parking lot, put on black clothing and masks, and came back to the house through the basement door they'd left unlocked. Once inside, they cut the power at the circuit breaker, plunging the house into darkness. Matt Beckham had already left. Cassie was alone on the couch. When the darkness didn't draw her downstairs, they went up to her. Draper opened and slammed a closet door to frighten her. And then both of them attacked. Cassie Jo Stoddart was stabbed 29 times. 12 of the wounds were potentially fatal. All of the fatal injuries came from Draper's serrated knife. She died on the floor of a house she'd been trusted to watch over. killed by two boys she thought were her friends. After the murder, they got back in the car and recorded another video. Draper looked into the camera and said, "We just killed Cassie. This is not a fucking joke." His voice was steady. Adamczyk sat beside him. Neither of them showed any distress. They discussed their alibis. They talked about where to dispose of the evidence. Then they drove out to Black Rock Canyon and buried the knives, the masks, the black clothing, the videotape, and a piece of notebook paper on which they had written a partial script that read, "We murder Cassie." When police questioned them, both boys claimed they had been at a movie theater watching a film called Pulse. But neither one could recall a single detail about the movie. Their alibis collapsed. Investigators recovered the buried evidence at Black Rock Canyon. And then they found the videotapes. The footage was played in court. The jury watched two smiling teenagers describe their plan to commit murder, then watched them celebrate after carrying it out. It was the kind of evidence that removes all reasonable doubt and replaces it with something closer to revulsion. Brian Draper was convicted on April 17, 2007. Tori Adamczyk was convicted on June 8 of the same year. Both received life without parole plus 30 years for conspiracy. Adamczyk's defense argued that he hadn't delivered the fatal wounds, that all lethal injuries came from Draper's serrated knife. The court didn't care. He was there. He participated. He helped plan it. He helped execute it. And he smiled about it on camera afterward. The judge stated his belief that if the two hadn't been caught, they would have killed again. They wanted to be serial killers. They said so themselves. On tape. Both remain at the Idaho State Correctional Institution near Kuna. Every appeal has been denied. The videotapes they made to immortalize themselves ended up being the very thing that guaranteed they'd never walk free. Draper and Adamczyk planned their killing for weeks and recorded the evidence themselves. They left behind a trail of footage so damning it practically convicted them on its own. But in Jacksonville, Florida, a 14-year-old left behind no recordings, no manifesto, and no confession. His crime was only discovered because his mother noticed a smell leaking from underneath his waterbed. Joshua Phillips. A mother was cleaning her 14-year-old son's bedroom when she noticed something leaking from underneath his waterbed. She grabbed a towel, got down on her knees, and pulled back the frame to find the source. What she found was the decomposing body of an 8-year-old girl who had been missing from the neighborhood for 7 days. That mother was Melissa Phillips, and the body belonged to Maddie Clifton, a girl from the neighborhood in Jacksonville, Florida, who the entire community had been desperately searching for since November 3, 1998. Josh Phillips was 14 years old, and for a full week, while hundreds of volunteers combed through parks and ditches and empty lots, while police helicopters circled overhead and flyers papered every telephone pole in the neighborhood, the missing girl had been underneath his waterbed, 7 feet from where he slept every single night. Josh's version of events, the one he gave investigators after his mother's discovery, was that Maddie had come over to play baseball. He claimed he accidentally hit a ball into her eye, causing her to bleed and scream. He said he panicked because his father would be home soon and had strict rules about having people in the house. So instead of calling for help, he dragged Maddie inside. Then, according to Josh, he hit her with the baseball bat again to stop the screaming. He put her under the base of the waterbed. And when his father came home, he interacted with him normally, as if nothing had happened. But the story doesn't end there. Josh later told investigators that hours after hiding Maddie, he realized she was still alive. He could hear her moaning underneath the bed. So he removed the mattress, cut her throat, and stabbed her 7 times in the chest. Prosecutors had serious doubts about Josh's account. There was no blood found in the backyard or on the baseball. The lack of dirt or sand on Maddie's body didn't support his claim of an outdoor accident. State Attorney Harry Shorstein noted that Josh had previously talked about sexual matters with both Maddie and her older sister Jessie, suggesting the motive may have been darker than a panicked reaction to an accident. What was never in dispute was what happened after the killing. Josh Phillips concealed an 8-year-old girl's body under his waterbed. He cleaned up the evidence. He ate dinner with his family that night. He went to school the next morning. He watched news coverage of Maddie's disappearance with his parents and said absolutely nothing. He even joined the neighborhood search effort, walking past volunteers who were crying, holding up flyers with the face of the girl decomposing in his bedroom. For 7 days, a 14-year-old boy maintained that performance. 7 days of lying to his parents, to neighbors, to police. 7 nights of sleeping on top of a dead child. At trial, the defense called no witnesses, not a single one. The defense attorney argued that Josh had been abused at home and lived in constant fear of his father. But the prosecution's case was overwhelming. Josh Phillips was convicted of first-degree murder in 1999 and sentenced to life without parole. Following the 2012 Supreme Court ruling in Miller v. Alabama, which banned mandatory life sentences for juveniles, Josh received a resentencing hearing. In June of 2017, he was resentenced to life with the possibility of review after 25 years. That review eligibility began in 2023. In a turn that surprised many, the original prosecutor, State Attorney Harry Shorstein, has since expressed regret over the severity of the sentence. He said he wished he had offered a second-degree murder plea deal instead. He has voiced support for eventual clemency or parole. Josh Phillips is currently preparing for his sentencing review. Maddie Clifton's family has spent more than 2 decades living with what happened. Their daughter was 8 years old. She walked out of her house one afternoon to play with the neighbor kid. She never came home, and the boy who killed her slept on top of her body for a week. Josh Phillips hid a body for 7 days, and nobody knew. But sometimes there's nothing hidden at all. Sometimes the killing happens in broad daylight, on a public street in South London, in front of dozens of witnesses and a rolling bus camera. And sometimes the whole thing starts over a teddy bear. Hassan Sentamu. Weeks before he killed her, Hassan Sentamu sent a message to a friend. He wrote, "Whenever you see me, it's never really me. It's a persona I put on. The real me is evil, dark, and miserable." His friend read it and moved on. Nobody flagged it. Nobody reported it. And on September 27th, 2023, the real Hassan Sentamu walked up to a 15-year-old girl outside a shopping center in Croydon, South London, and stabbed her 10 times. Eliane Undum was 15 years old. She was an aspiring lawyer. She was popular at school, and she was killed over something so absurd it's almost impossible to say out loud. A teddy bear. Hassan Sentamu was 17. He'd had a brief relationship with one of Eliane's friends, a girl known publicly only as S. He ended the relationship by text 10 days before the murder. In the days that followed, Eliane and a group of friends confronted Sentamu about how he'd treated S. They threw water at him and teased him about his appearance and his history at a special education school. He told a friend afterward that he couldn't let that slide. The friend told him not to do anything dumb. The day of the killing, Sentamu arranged a meeting with his ex-girlfriend to exchange belongings. He told her he'd return her teddy bear, but instead of bringing the stuffed animal, he brought a kitchen knife. He wore a mask and black gloves. When Sentamu refused to hand over the belongings, Eliane grabbed his bag and ran. He chased her, and then, on a public street outside the Whitgift Center, in front of bus passengers, shoppers, and CCTV cameras, he caught up to her and stabbed her as she lay on the ground. She pleaded with him to stop. He didn't. One of the stab wounds was 12 centimeters deep, It went through her neck. A bus driver stopped, ran to Eliane, held her hand, and stayed with her as she died on the pavement. She was 15 years old. After the attack, Sentamu didn't panic. He made calm, controlled decisions. He discarded his gloves. He toggled his phone to no-caller ID. He disposed of the knife. He was arrested within 90 minutes. Hassan Sentamu's history should have raised alarms long before that September morning. At age 12, he brought a knife to school during a lesson and said he wanted to kill himself. He received a youth conditional caution and was sent back to class. He had threatened children with knives on multiple occasions. He put 2 girls in headlocks. He threatened to stab a student with scissors. In 2020, he was moved to a school for students with special educational needs. He had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder in 2019. He was a boy with a documented history of violence, knife possession, and threatening behavior. And he was still walking the streets of Croydon with a blade in his waistband the morning he killed Eliane Andam. At trial, his defense claimed diminished responsibility due to autism. The prosecution argued that he was capable of exercising self-control, pointing to the calculated decisions he made before, during, and after the murder. The mask, the gloves, the phone set to no-caller ID, the methodical disposal of evidence. This wasn't a loss of control. This was planning. On January 16, 2025, Hassan Sentamu was found guilty of murder. On March 13th, he was sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 years. He cried in the dock when the sentence was read. While on remand awaiting trial, another inmate had accused Sentamu of killing girls. His response, captured on record, was, "I'll do it again. I'll do it to your mum. Do you want to end up like her, 6 feet under?" Eliane's mother, Dorcas, addressed him at sentencing. She told him, "You brutally murdered her in the most humiliating way in broad daylight, mercilessly killing her on the floor as she begged for mercy." Her father, Michael, described Eliane as a bright light whose absence left a gaping wound. Her sister developed post-traumatic stress disorder. The murder of Eliane Andam sparked vigils attended by thousands, including the rapper Stormzy. Her death was cited as evidence of an epidemic of violence against women and girls in Britain. Her story later inspired the Netflix series Adolescence, which explored the motivations behind extreme violence committed by teenagers. Sentamu killed Eliane on a public street in broad daylight. But the final case on this list happened somewhere that was supposed to be the safest place a kid could be during the middle of the day. A school, during lunch. And the boy who brought the knife had been flagged just 5 days earlier. Mohammed Umar Khan. 5 days before the murder, the school went into lockdown. A student claimed another boy had a knife. Police were called. The building was searched. No weapon was found. The incident was documented. And the student at the center of it all, Mohammed Umar Khan, was sent home and allowed to return the following Monday without being searched. On that Monday, February 3rd, 2025, at 12:15 in the afternoon, during the start of lunch break at All Saints Catholic High School in Sheffield, England, Khan pulled out a hunting knife with a 13-centimeter serrated blade and stabbed 15-year-old Harvey Wilgoose twice. One of the wounds pierced Harvey's heart. He lost consciousness within a minute and died at the scene. His classmates watched it happen. Some locked themselves in a cupboard to hide. Mohammed Umar Khan was 15 years old. Harvey Wilgoose was 15 years old. And the knife that killed him had been purchased online using Khan's parents' bank card. The question that consumed Sheffield in the days and weeks after the murder wasn't just why Khan did it. It was how he was allowed anywhere near that school with a weapon after what had happened 5 days earlier. On January 29th, an altercation broke out between 2 students. Khan tried to intervene and had to be restrained by a teacher. He claimed one of the boys had a knife. The school declared a lockdown. Police were called. No weapon was found. Harvey Wilgoose wasn't even at school that day. He stayed home the rest of the week. He texted his father, "I'm not going in that school while people have knives." Over the weekend, Harvey and Con fell out on social media. Each took a different side in the dispute between the two boys from the lockdown incident. By the time Monday morning arrived, the tension between them had been building for days. When Con returned to school on February 3rd, assistant head teacher Morgan Davis pulled him aside and asked him to write a statement about the lockdown incident. Davis specifically asked if Con had brought anything to school that he shouldn't have, like a weapon. Con said no. He said he was happy to be in school. He had a hunting knife in his bag. CCTV footage from that morning shows Con squaring up to Harvey in a corridor, physically pushing him. Nobody intervened. At 12:15, the start of lunch, Con pulled the knife and attacked. After the stabbing, Con told the head teacher, "I'm not right in the head. My mom doesn't look after me right." When assistant head Davis took the knife from him, Con said, "You know I can't control it," referring to his anger issues. The background that emerged during investigation and trial painted a picture of a teenager who had been escalating for years. His previous school, Silverdale, had recorded 130 incidents over just 3 school years. He had a history of aggression toward teachers and property. He had an unhealthy and long-standing interest with knives. Photos and videos on his phone showed him posing with weapons. His internet search history included weapons-related terms. On the morning of the killing, he had searched online for a prayer to keep him safe. In December of 2024, just 2 months before the murder, police had visited Con's home after his own mother found photographs of him posing with weapons. An officer advised him about the dangers of carrying weapons. Con ignored the advice completely. His defense argued he had snapped after years of being bullied. His barrister told the court that Con had experienced racist abuse, taunts on social media about a medical condition, and a long history of poor treatment and violence from peers. The defense framed the killing as the end result of a long period of bullying, poor treatment, and violence. Con claimed he carried the knife for protection, fearing other teenagers with weapons. The jury didn't accept self-defense. In August of 2025, Mohammed Umar Khan was found guilty of murder and convicted of carrying a bladed weapon onto school premises. In October, the judge lifted reporting restrictions on his identity. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 16 years. He showed no reaction as the sentence was read. An external review of the school's handling of the situation described the decision not to search Con on the morning of the murder as a collective leadership failure. Harvey's mother, Caroline, put it more simply. She said, "If you've got a reason to ask, you've got a reason to search." Harvey Wilgoose's sister, Sophie, addressed the court. She said, "The defendant didn't just end Harvey's life. He ended ours too." The family described being haunted daily by the CCTV footage, made worse because Con refused to take any responsibility for what he did. Harvey's family has since launched a youth club and anti-knife crime campaign in his memory. They're trying to turn the worst thing that ever happened to them into something that might prevent it from happening to someone else. But nothing they build will bring Harvey back. He was 15, he was in school, he was where he was supposed to be. And 5 days after a lockdown over a weapon, nobody thought to check the bag of the boy at the center of it all. 10 cases. 10 boys who will spend the rest of their lives behind bars for what they did before they were old enough to vote. Every one of them had warning signs, and every one of those signs was missed or ignored by someone who could have stopped it. Thanks for watching. Click here for the next video.